Hey everyone, my name is Joseph, and today I'm going to be giving you a short introduction on the heart. So I'm only going to be doing up to GCSE level in today's lesson, so I'm not going to be too specific, but hopefully after this lesson, hopefully you'll understand how the heart works, how blood is circulated around the body, and the different structures, internal structures within the heart. So I think to start off with, it's important to understand that the heart is a very important organ. Okay, it's known as a double pump because it is responsible in pumping blood to the lungs and in pumping blood to the rest of the body. So it pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs and oxygenated blood to the rest of the body, which is very important in keeping us alive. So there's two circulations involved in this, and I'll just draw that on here. So okay, so here we have the pulmonary circulation. So pulmonary just means associated with the lungs. So when I say pulmonary circulation, I mean it's the circulation from the heart to the lungs. So and we also have the systemic circulation, which just means to the rest of the body. Okay. So I think I'll start off in the body. So in the body, your cells and your tissues will aerobically respire, and that will use up oxygen. So when you use up oxygen, your blood will become deoxygenated. So they'll lose their oxygen, and I've just put a little key here. So the blue color of the blood represents deoxygenated blood, whereas the red one represents oxygenated blood. Okay, so cells use up oxygen, and this deoxygenated blood will travel through a vein called the Vena Cava. Actually, there's a superior and an inferior Vena Cava, but I think as far as we're concerned at this level, deoxygenated blood will travel through the Vena Cava to the right side of the heart, specifically the right atrium. And I think it's also important to understand that veins are blood vessels which carry blood towards the heart, but arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. So I'm just going to split the heart into four sections because there are four chambers in the heart. Okay, the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. The atrium are the upper chambers, and the ventricles are the lower chambers. I'll just split it into four there. This one's the right atrium. This one's the right ventricle. This is the left atrium, and this one's the left ventricle. Okay, so deoxygenated blood will flow into the right atrium through the vena cava, which is a vein, and that comes in from the body. And then from the right atrium, blood will then be pumped to the right ventricle, and then blood will then be pumped out of the pulmonary artery, which is shown here, to the lungs, where they'll be oxygenated. And just a brief summary of the lungs. So the lungs are responsible in oxygenating your blood. So we have the trachea here. Air will flow down through the trachea, where it then bifurcates or splits into two bronchi here. And then these bronchi branch off into little branches called bronchioles, which will then branch off into little alveoli, which have close contact with your capillaries, and that's where gaseous exchange will take place. So that's where oxygenation of the blood will take place, and then here you'll have this red oxygenated blood coming back from the lungs through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium of the heart. And from the left atrium, blood will then be pumped into the left ventricle. And from the left ventricle, blood will then be pumped through this really important artery called the aorta. It will be pumped through the aorta to the rest of the body, where the whole process starts over again. Your cells, the blood will go to your cells and your tissues, and then they'll be used to respire. And then the whole process starts again. So that's just a general basic concept of the circulation of blood. I think an important thing to note is that where most people get confused is that the pulmonary artery is responsible in carrying deoxygenated blood, whereas the pulmonary vein is involved in carrying oxygenated blood. Okay. The aorta, though, and in general for most arteries, they will carry oxygenated blood away from the heart to the rest of the body, and veins usually carry deoxygenated blood from the rest of the body to the heart. Okay. So hopefully that was clear. So now I'm going to move on to the internal structures of the heart. Again, I am going to divide the heart into 4 chambers to make it clear. Right. So here we have right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and your left ventricle. I think one important thing to notice is that the left ventricle is actually a lot more thicker than the right ventricle. So that is because the right side only needs to pump blood to the lungs. So, and the lungs are actually in close proximity to the heart, so it doesn't need to go that far. Whereas with the left ventricle, the left ventricle is responsible for pumping blood to the rest of the body, so it needs to be more muscular so that it can generate enough pressure and enough force to pump blood to the rest of the body. So that's why the left ventricle is more muscular than the right, and that's a common exam question, so it just might be useful to know. So also, I think at this level, we don't need to know the exact specific names of the valves, but I think it's important to appreciate that there are valves within the heart to prevent backflow of blood, for example, from the ventricles back to the atrium. So the valves can open and shut, and they allow one-way flow of blood, which is really important in preventing the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So I'm just going to draw the valves here. We have 4 in the heart. And there are 2 types of valves. We have our semilunar valves and our atrioventricular valves. So these are your atrioventricular valves, or your AV valves. And these ones up here are your semilunar valves, or SL valves. Okay. So what happens is that when the heart is pumping, depending on which part of the heart pumps, for example, when the atria pumps or when the ventricle pumps, these valves will open and close respectively. So here, blood will enter the will enter the right atrium through the vena cava. When the atrium pumps, then this valve will open, allowing blood to flow from the right atrium to the right ventricle. This AV valve will then shut, and this semilunar valve will then open, allowing blood to then go out through the pulmonary artery to the rest of the lungs, where it's then oxygenated. Blood will then return back to the left atrium through the pulmonary vein. And this blood is now oxygenated, so this AV valve will now open. That allows blood from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and from there, this AV valve will then close to prevent backflow, and then this semilunar valve will open, allowing blood to flow from the left ventricle to the rest of the body through the aorta. I think one last thing to note is that the heart has pacemakers which control and regulate its beating. So we have a pacemaker here and a pacemaker here. Okay, and these are called, so this one is called your sinoatrial node, or your SA node. And this one, which is close to the septum of the heart, is your atrioventricular node, or your AV node. So these nodes are important in producing electrical impulses and coordinating these electrical impulses throughout the heart. So electrical impulses will flow from the SA node to the AV node and through fibers called Purkinje fibers throughout the heart. So these electrical impulses will be conducted and regulated, and this will allow the heart to contract at specific times to allow blood to flow throughout the heart. Okay, so this has been a brief lesson on the heart. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you've understood, and thank you very much.